All right, here we go. It's Thursday, the deeper dive right here, youtube.com/awesemo. I'm Dave Lochran. With me, as always, Adam Scher on this wonderful January 9th, 2020 night. 4 games to discuss here. We'll get into all of that. But first, Adam, what's happening, man?
How's it going, man? Pretty interesting DFS day, I guess, so far. Entertaining at least, but how are you doing?
DFS Twitter is an absolute wasteland at this point. I mean,
in so many directions right now.
I know it's not just what everyone thinks. Like,
right.
Will there be anything left of it when all the dust settles? I honestly don't know, but it's made for some quality entertainment, to say the least. And like, you don't even have to tweet if you just sit back and kind of go along for the ride. You have not been wanting for entertainment over the past 2 days. Hell, I haven't even watched my normal TV shows, man. I just go on Twitter. Very simple. But we're happy to have you with us as always. 4 games to talk about. The question I ask you to kick off every show, very simple. Initial thoughts on this slate. General thoughts on what we have right now. Any injuries, stars, scrubs, balanced lineup. What are you seeing out of the gate?
Not a whole lot of value. We're waiting on injury news in several of the later games, but it's not really likely that good value opens up even if those guys are out. We're waiting on Karl Anthony Towns, who's questionable, waiting on Gallinari, who went from being listed as out to questionable for Oklahoma City, waiting on a starting lineup from Philadelphia, and waiting on Hassan Whiteside, but not really a whole lot of value to be had. You do have James Harden at the top of the slate, but outside of that, he's really the only really expensive option to pay up for. So looking like more of a balanced slate for me than usual.
How much do you think how much do you think rides on this Danilo Gallinari news?
Not a ton. I think that the guys that you would be interested in if Gallinari is out are still reasonable options if he's in, because at least speaking for myself, I wasn't interested, or I'm not interested in Bazley or Diallo. So it's not like if Gallinari's in, I'm going to be scrambling. It's just that guys like the 3 guards and Steven Adams to some extent are a little bit less appealing, but they're still perfectly fine options if Gallinari's in. I think the biggest impact that the Gallinari news has is that Gallinari himself is a reasonable option.
All right. Well, I guess I have to preface this at the top of the show. We'll ban your ass for the fake tweets, or the fake news, fake injury reports. That you can't do that. Look, I get what you're saying in terms of like line movement, but you can't say he's out because the line moved. Like, if he's out, we'll know. But just because a line move does not mean that he is going to be out of this game. For all we know, it could have had something to do that maybe Karl Anthony Towns is going to play instead. So I'm not saying that's the case. That's probably unlikely too, but it doesn't do anybody any good. So please wait until we actually have confirmation, and then we'll take it from there. But yeah, there's a number of different reasons the line could have moved. It certainly isn't verifying that Whiteside is in or out. Right now, Adam, like you said, a couple guys in Detroit: Kennard, Markieff Morris out, Dante Exum for Cleveland. Alfonso McKinney was just signed again to a 10-day contract. We'll get into all of this. Joel Embiid with that nasty finger came back, and then he's out for this one. Towns, Whiteside, Gordon, Danilo Gallinari are all questionable. So there's a lot to get into. Let's just kick it off. And I'm not calling you dumb, Nathan. I'm just asking for the sake of everybody else in chat, that some of them might be a little bit more believing than others. No one specifically at all, but some people just take that shit as Bible. So just be careful with that. We'd appreciate it. Philadelphia. Let's kick it off here. Got the Philadelphia 76ers at home. They're still 2.5-point favorites, Adam, with Joel Embiid sidelined. And we have a lot to talk about in this game. 215.5 total, 109 implied for Sixers, 106.5 for the Celtics. And I'll just give you one example of Joel Embiid's impact. And you've got Horford with Whiteside on the floor this year, has a 10.7% usage rate, 10% rebound rate, 14.5% assist rate, and 0.63 fantasy points per minute. With Embiid off, 22% usage, 13% rebounding, 19% assists, and 1.13 fantasy points per minute. Dramatic improvement for Horford, who is virtually useless with Joel Embiid off on the floor. It's a bad matchup. I get that. It's a good defensive team in Boston, but taking someone like Embiid off the floor sends shockwaves throughout the entirety of this lineup.
Yeah, and as far as I know, still waiting for the starting lineup from Philly. The last time that Embiid sat was against the Pacers. We got Kyle O'Quinn starting. Prior to that, we had been getting Mike Scott in the starting lineup, and then before that, we had gotten I think 1 or 2 games of Korkmaz. My guess here is that they go back to Scott. It obviously could be O'Quinn. It doesn't change a whole lot for me, but it does if you're starting Mike Scott, it does give you, a little bit more production from Horford since he's a lower usage guy than O'Quinn. But I think that, you mentioned the numbers on Horford. He's a lot better on a per minute basis without Embiid. One note, and obviously but one thing about just in general looking at solely at the per minute numbers is that, like in Horford's case, he's playing a lot of center against kind of backup centers. So that's I guess kind of one thing to keep in mind, but the rates go up across the board, as you said, too. So I do think that it's a good spot for Horford. You should get probably 31, 32 minutes from him. He's affordable. He grades out as the top guy from Philly for me right now.
All right. So we'll rank him in a minute, but who'd you say was your top guy, Horford?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. Now I will say this much. If O'Quinn is in the lineup, how much does that – I'll ask you this much. I have my opinion, but we'll get yours first. How much does it change your opinion of Horford if Horford remains at the 4 and O'Quinn starts at the 5? He's still going to have – the usage will still be there. Rebounding will still improve, but we'd always like him closer to the basket.
Right. That's pretty much where I'm at. It doesn't make me dislike Horford. I would just prefer if O'Quinn doesn't start. But even if O'Quinn starts, you're still going to get Horford playing a bunch of minutes at the 5. It's just that it probably would be a little bit less than if O'Quinn doesn't start. Now,
Tobias Harris, his price has come up. Man, he is a very unpredictable player. It's difficult to know what you're going to get from a guy like Harris because he does rely pretty heavily on shooting, and there are days where he is just downright miserable. But let's do this again. 0.83 DraftKings points per minute with Embiid on the floor, 21% usage rate, 8% rebounding rate. You take Joel Embiid off the floor, well, everything changes again. Fantasy points per minute for Tobias Harris shoot to 1.22, Adam. That's a huge number. Usage goes from 21 to 26%, and rebounding goes to 13%. So another just huge advantage for Tobias here. Let's talk about him and then round it out with Simmons. We can get into Richardson a little bit and O'Quinn and rank these guys, but I want to dig a little deeper than usual, being that we only have 4 games, and this right now is the biggest injury on the slate.
Yeah, it's a bump for Harris as well. 26+% usage rate without Embiid this year. Gets more time at the 4 potentially, so more rebounding opportunities as well. And he generally plays 34, 35 minutes in competitive games anyway. So even though it is a tough matchup against a strong Boston defense, I think the opportunity should be there for Harris. I think that he looks like a pretty good option. I would expect him to lead Philadelphia in usage without Embiid.
Okay. How about Simmons? I mentioned to Alex when you were, was it Monday or Tuesday that you were at the game? Monday?
Monday.
That every time Simmons has attempted 14 or more field goals this season, he has 50+ fantasy points. And in the 8 times or 9 times he's attempted 13+ field goal attempts, he's got 50+ fantasy points in all but one of those. I bring that up because when he's aggressive, he is super appealing from a fantasy perspective. But this is a Boston team along with the Raptors. They've done a very good job of making his life miserable because they just clog the paint. They know that he's going to kick it out. They don't have many concerns. He won't shoot the basketball with any range. And this to me is one of those matchups that Simmons has struggled with before because they don't give him an easy opportunity to get to the basket. Now that his price has come up, I personally don't see myself getting all that much, even though it's a 4-gamer. If he was maybe low 8K, I'd have a very different opinion of him.
That's where I'm at as well. The minutes are the most appealing thing for me from Simmons. I mean,
Yeah,
the
they're
guy just
huge. You're
right, he
right.
just plays huge minutes. But the salary has come up enough. Like looking at DraftKings, for example, he's more expensive than Russell Westbrook, who we'll obviously talk about later. But he's one of the more expensive options on the slate. Even without Embiid on the floor this year, he has a 19.5% usage rate. He's
Crazy,
averaged
right?
yeah, he's averaged 1.09 DraftKings points per minute. And this is a Boston team that has plenty of length. They play against him frequently. They know how to defend him. It's not to say that someone playing 38 to 40 minutes and averaging over a fantasy point per minute without Embiid can't have a big game. He clearly can, but I just don't like him nearly as much as I like Horford or Harris at cheaper prices, or even Josh Richardson, who's a lot cheaper and should play 34, 35 minutes as well. You just don't really see that much of a bump for Simmons without Embiid.
No, we're on the same page. Like you said, 1.09 and without Embiid, 1.06. His usage without Embiid, I think, is what you said. With him, it's 19.5.
Yeah, I have it at 19 and a half.
Yeah, 20.4 without him. It's it doesn't move that much.
Right. And also what you'll see happen a lot of times, especially on a smaller slate like this, is when Embiid's out, the ownership for all of these guys goes up, and it's not necessarily directly proportional to how much they benefit from Embiid being out. There's going to just be a lot of, Embiid's out, Simmons is great, Harris is great, all these guys are great. And so you probably are going to see Simmons ownership maybe get a little bit higher than it would be, or than is justified by Embiid being out.
Joel Embiid, by the way, torn ligament in his hand without a timetable for return. That's something else.
That's looking good for your bet with Josh.
Oh, that's right. That's right, Josh. I know you're listening, pal. I mean, it sucks because I'm a Sixers fan, but honestly, as long as they get in like 6 seed or better, whatever. But I'd mentioned Boston makes it tough for him. If you look at his shot volume, Ben Simmons' shot volume over the last 5 meetings with the Celtics, he's attempted fewer than 10 field goals in all but one of them. It's just a spot that I really don't love at all. Do you want to do if O'Quinn starts? You mentioned earlier at the top of the show, not a ton of value here. If O'Quinn starts, what type of interest do you have in him? DK did preemptively price him up with Joel Embiid out.
Yeah, I think I'd have more interest on FanDuel, but even there, he's only a center. So at 4,100, there's still a lot of opportunity cost, even though there's not a whole lot of actual cost. At 4,900 on DraftKings, I don't think it's that appealing. In the game that he started, do you have how many minutes he played against Indiana?
Hold on, I'll tell you right now.
I can get it in a second.
It was
I think 26.
26 minutes. Yeah,
yeah,
26 minutes on the 31st of January.
Yeah, so I mean, if he starts,
December.
And you expect 25, 26 minutes, he's over a fantasy point per minute guy, so he'd be fine just because there is a lack of value. But at 4,900 on DraftKings, I still don't love the salary. And then on FanDuel, obviously means that you're giving up Capella, Drummond, Adams, potentially Whiteside. So still a lot of opportunity cost.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right. The fact that there's such that you can only play one center there makes it difficult. 4,100 is fine, but yeah, you're giving up a lot at that position, no doubt. Now, granted, we're still waiting on big injury news between Minnesota and Portland. Both of those centers we're waiting on, and that could send some ripples throughout the rest of this slate, but we'll get there when we do. I don't think we'll need to spend as much time on Boston. Philly definitely in a unique situation. What about the Celtics? A bunch of guys like Tatum and Hayward and Jaylen Brown that are all almost identically priced. They're within $200 of each other, all of them on DraftKings. So is Kemba Walker. He got ejected last night and played 18 minutes. We heard he was going to be limited, but $6,500 on Kemba seems unbelievably cheap. If he's getting regular minutes, I'd have Kemba everywhere. The question here really is, what about him now that we don't know what his minutes are going to look like?
Right. I mean, I gave him 32 minutes, but I haven't seen anything on what to expect from him either. If he gets 32 minutes, I have him as, a better than average play. The price tag's obviously cheap. I have him projected for between 34, 35 DraftKings points in 32 minutes, which makes that salary pretty appealing. I think that I prefer Derrick Rose by a little bit, who's close to the same price point on DraftKings, but Kemba obviously is a little cheaper than he should be.
All right. Yeah, the 76ers to ball handlers this season, allowing, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 8th most points. Not very high efficiency, but teams are operating in the pick and roll. Ball. Listen to this. But when I mentioned something the other day, I got it wrong, and I was convinced I was right. I was talking about roll men in the pick and roll. It was ball handlers that have performed quite well against them. Not necessarily efficient, but 23% frequency in pick and roll possession against the Sixers is the highest of any team not named the Jazz this season. So Kemba, is a high frequency pick and roll guy, and he has carved the Sixers up in seasons past. So I think if you get 32, 33 minutes, I don't know, but in the event that you did from him, this could be a fantastic spot. What else are you doing for Boston?
Yeah, I think that Tatum and Brown are both pretty appealing at their salaries too. They both dropped close to $1,000 on DraftKings for no real reason. And while Philadelphia is a good team defensively, they're not as good without Embiid on the floor, which you would expect. So that's a benefit as well. I still expect 33, 34 minutes from Tatum and from Brown. Tatum's still having his minutes, at least as of yesterday, having his minutes staggered with Kemba, which is obviously appealing for him as well. I think Tatum is actually he's up there with Kemba as my favorite option from Boston, and then Jaylen Brown's not too far behind.
Okay. What else do you have for Boston, if anything?
Not a whole lot. Like Daniel Tice is only 4K on DraftKings, but he doesn't project particularly well for me either. So it would just kind of be a guy that ends up, in there as filler, but not a guy I'm actually, like actively targeting.
Okay. I think we hit everything on this game, right?
Yeah, I think so.
We didn't hit on our Super Draft sponsor. That's right. Super Draft is the sponsor of the Deeper Dive. They're the future of daily fantasy sports, baby, because they got the multiplier format. If you haven't checked it out, you can download that app in the App Store or play at superdraft.io. The multiplier makes it so you don't have to deal with salary restrictions. It's entire and utter bliss because it's lineup freedom, baby. The multiplier taking, better players, their fantasy points are multiplied by less. Worse players or less talented players are multiplied by more. So you can make very unique any lineup combinations based on who you think is going to perform well and is worthy of those high or low multipliers. All you have to do if you want to get $20 in super cash with your first deposit of $100 or more is use the promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. $20 free in super cash when you make that first deposit of $100 or more. And they've got contests for NFL, baseball, basketball, hockey, PGA. So all year round, you can get your DFS action in on Super Draft. Again, use the sign-up code AWESEMO, $20 in cash, super cash, your first deposit, $100 or more. And you can download the app, get it through the App Store or at superdraft.io. No limits, more winning, Super Draft. All right, let's keep it moving here. Detroit and Cleveland. Home and home series, Adam. They faced each other 2 days ago. Very competitive game, 115 to 113. That was an OT game, right?
Which game?
Maybe not. For some reason, I thought that game went to OT.
The Cleveland-Detroit game?
Yeah.
No.
No?
It came really close. It was like a 2-point game.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
I remember because I wanted it to go to OT and it didn't.
I really wanted that game to go to OT as well. Yeah. Maybe I'm just assuming it did and it didn't. But nevertheless, it's kind of an interesting one, even though it's generally pretty ugly for both teams. There is a lot to talk about. It has a 220.5 total, which first stands out to me more than anything. Pistons are 7-point favorites, 113.8 implied total for them, 106.8 for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Starting with the Pistons, though, we'll get to Derrick Rose. I'm going to let you break the rest of this down. But I'm sorry, to Drummond. But I want to start with Derrick Rose. He played 31 minutes last game, got up 21 shots. He's clearly a high usage player whose minutes increasing is only going to benefit him more. He's played 27 plus minutes now in, I think, 6 straight games. Yeah, so dating back to the 28th. Really, really fascinating spot for a guy like Derrick Rose, who I think we talked about this yesterday. when he gets it going, Derrick Rose is going to have free reign to pretty much do whatever he wants. And over this 6-game stretch, since we've seen his usage we've seen his minutes increase, how about this? 34% usage rate, 31% assist rate, and 1.34 fantasy points per minute over those 164 minutes. He's playing well. He's getting more minutes. And now he's got a pretty sexy matchup against Cleveland. Is he worth the price point tonight?
I think so. Yeah. He's in addition to the, what'd you say?
I said, me too. If my tirade there didn't just let on.
Yeah. I mean, in addition to the numbers you just pointed out, this season, he's played 421 minutes without either one of Griffin or Luke Kennard on the floor. 33.5% usage rate, 45.3% assist percentage, 1.29 DraftKings points per minute. He's cheap enough where even if I project him for like 28 minutes, I'm getting him as a really good option. And then obviously there's a little bit more upside there. He's been lobbying for more minutes. Dwayne Casey said it's up to the training staff. And it doesn't sound like they're going to start, running him out there.
I don't think he's going to get 30 plus every night, but even 29 from Rose is a lot better than where we were.
Right, exactly. And there's nothing in his way. Like Reggie Jackson is out. Bruce Brown is whatever. Tim Frazier's not in the rotation as of last game. Langston Galloway is not taking minutes. There's nobody there to take minutes from Derrick Rose. It's just a matter of how many minutes can he handle, how many minutes will the coaching staff and the training staff give him. So there's no, it's not even like it's a Teague and Napier situation like we have in Minnesota where there is another good player stopping him from playing more minutes. It's his to play as many minutes as he can, and he's been very productive. He's facing a bad Cleveland team. He's one of my top guys tonight.
I also saw something where he's talking about being able he said, where is it? Hold on. About the being able to get to the rim with ease with the way that teams are playing him right now. Here it is. Right now the floor is open. If they're backing up and going on the screens, I'd be shooting a lot more. But the way they're playing me, the drive is open. That's what I am naturally. I'm a driver, so I'm going to take what the game gives me and just try to make it more comfortable and be prepared to recognize those spots. Why do I mention that? Because we love guys, guards that are willing to drive and get to the rim at a high clip. It just makes them more efficient players. And I guess the thing for me is, do we expect 31 minutes? No, certainly not. Somebody mentioned it in our Slack chat. Didn't Casey say that was too much for Rose? Yeah, and I wouldn't expect that to be the case again, but he, like you just said, it's important. He has been lobbying for more minutes. And I think the days of 24, 25 minutes per game are at least gone. I'd put it that way.
Right. I mean, I have him at 28 minutes, but if you're giving him 1.3 points per minute in 28 minutes, it still looks pretty good. And obviously the natural comparison on DraftKings is to Kemba, who we have minutes questions about him too. We have no idea how many minutes he's playing today. He doesn't
matchup too.
Right, worst matchup. He doesn't project as nearly the point per minute guy that Rose is. So I don't really think that there's any more risk in Rose than there is in Kemba. I have him a little bit ahead of Kemba as is, even projected for fewer minutes.
Okay, yeah, good points. Since we've seen his minutes expanded, he is fifth in the league in drives per game. How about that, dude? Over that span, he's averaging 21 drives per game. That's a monster number.
Yeah, that's a ton.
Doncic is at 20.9. He's at 20.7. Holy shit, man. That's crazy. Talk to me about Drummond and the rest of the Pistons.
Yeah, Drummond looks like one of the best options on the slate. He's expensive, but he's not unaffordable. He's not up in that James Harden tier. You're getting in competitive games 36 plus minutes. He's obviously been really good without Griffin on the floor this season. There's no reason to think that doesn't continue. The usage goes up, the assists go up, rebounding goes up. He's again like Tristan Thompson. He's going up against Tristan Thompson, who is a good rebounder, but Drummond has a pretty big size advantage on Thompson. There's no real reason, I don't think, to expect him to struggle to get rebounds. You're talking about an inefficient Cleveland offense. There should be plenty of rebounding opportunities for Drummond. I think I get to a lot of him. The only real negative that I would point to is that there are pretty solid or pretty high upside mid-range center options if you wanted to kind of forego some of the dicey value on this slate. But I expect Drummond to be in a lot of my lineups.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too. You're going to continue to get monster performances from this guy with Blake Griffin off the court. This one is more simple than most because we've seen this for a long time now. We know what Drummond looks like. with Blake off the floor. I don't know. Maybe you've looked this up, but I would guess that even with Rose on the floor, Drummond is still, it would Rose on and Drummond off, because we have to acknowledge that Rose is playing more minutes, that Drummond's still been productive. 1.36 fantasy points per minute. And he's going to start both halves with Rose off the floor. And still has,
Rose has started the second half 2 games in a row.
What's that?
Rose has started the second half 2 games in a row.
Yeah, I have trouble believing. Maybe it will continue. That's such a weird thing, but
your point is right. But
no, I'm glad you brought it up. Will it continue? I don't know, but nevertheless, it's still a good spot for Andre Drummond. He smoked them last game for 23 and 20. And how many times do we talk about this? His stocks upside is massive. So he can come in and give you 6 steals plus blocks any day of the week. Round out the Detroit side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, beyond those two, there's not a priority for me, but there are still secondary options. I think that Bruce Brown should get around 28 minutes. He is affordably priced. He's only $5K on DraftKings with guard forward eligibility. So he looks like the third option for me. Then you get Sekou Doumbouya, who's playing big minutes. A little more, I think a little bit more expensive than he should be, but he's played in mid 30s minutes, so it's still reasonably appealing. Svi is projected for a good amount of ownership. That's a spot where I understand why he's getting ownership. He's a good point per dollar option. He's 4,200 on DraftKings. There's not a lot of value, and he's playing into the mid 30s. I haven't projected for 32 minutes, but you're talking about someone that averages like 2/3 of a fantasy point per minute or a little bit less. Whenever you're talking about a player like that getting a lot of ownership simply because there's a lack of other options that people believe in, that's one of my favorite spots to just pivot and try and get exposure to players priced around him that don't project quite as well, but don't have really a different range of outcomes whatsoever.
Okay, so tell me, rank your top Pistons, because it's a team that on a 4-game slate is definitely going to get quite a bit of interest.
Yeah. Drummond, Rose, then like a drop to Bruce Brown, and then another drop to Svi, Sekou, Wood, Galloway.
All right. I couldn't keep track of all of them, but I'm with you on the first 3. And then mostly for me, Drummond and Rose are guys that priority for Rose, but I still like Drummond and Rose, both of them, quite a bit. On the Cleveland side, it gets a little dicey for a couple of reasons, right? Brandon Knight was good to me, good to us last time out. 25 fantasy points across 24 minutes on the season. He has been under a per minute guy, but it shouldn't matter much. The big question is, does Alfonso McKinney come back in and jack minutes up a little bit more and move guys that may have been playing some 4 down to the 3, eventually take minutes away from Brandon Knight? I get that a lot of this doesn't matter, but just an overall understanding of the rotation is what I'm trying to ascertain here. And, are we interested in Sexton, whose minutes have been huge, but production has been modest, to say the least?
Yeah, I think that even though obviously McKinney's not useful in DFS, he's not even in the DraftKings player pool, it does matter because it does potentially take minutes away from Knight, potentially take minutes away, again, not that it matters too much, but from Dellavedova. It's just another body out there. So I think that whereas we were interested in Knight last time, I'm not interested in him here with McKinney back. I think that Sexton and Garland are playing bigger minutes, like you said. Garland looks a little bit better to me just because he's $1,100 cheaper on DraftKings. I have them both projected for 34 minutes here. I have Chetty at 32 minutes, which is completely mediocre. So I think that just having the extra bodies and taking maybe a minute off of guys like Sexton and Garland, I'm not as interested in the Cleveland side as I am the Detroit side, especially in the kind of secondary guys like Sexton and Garland and Chetty.
Okay. So let's just kind of close this game out. You've already talked about, I think we've extensively talked about Detroit. Where are you going in Cleveland? And do you have any priorities here?
Yeah, I think Love will be my highest owned guy from Cleveland. The minutes have been there. Got up to 36 minutes in their last game when he faced Detroit. I have him in for 35 minutes today, but obviously over a 1 fantasy point per minute guy, he's still affordable. His price tag on FanDuel is even cheaper than it is on DraftKings, which is really nice. So he really stands out. Tristan Thompson is there as a pivot in tournaments to guys like Steven Adams. That's at a similar price point at center. I have Adams higher than Thompson, but you should get around 32, 33 minutes from Thompson to deal with Drummond. I think that he's a tournament pivot you can go to. And then, kind of just secondary guys from Sexton and Garland. So the only guy that I would say is anywhere close to a priority from Cleveland is Love.
Okay. Just going across some injury news here. Anything significant? Looks like the answer to that is no. We can keep it moving on if that's good with you.
Yep.
Minnesota, Portland. Let's get into this one. We've got the Minnesota Timberwolves, coming into this game as 2.5 point. It opened at 2 point dogs, right? I'm sorry. They opened as 2 point dogs. Now they're 2.5 point dogs, 224 total, 113 implied for Minnesota, 112 for Portland. But we sit here and we are without news on a bunch of areas. One of them being Karl-Anthony Towns remains questionable, but I think this would be like the 12th straight game he's missed, assuming he's out. And then Hassan Whiteside is coming into this one questionable with an upper respiratory illness. This one is a bit more sketchy than Towns just because Towns, he has a chance to play, but we felt like that every night. Pre-game warm-ups is where they're saying Towns will have his status determined, which sucks because it's not a 7 p.m. game. But I guess we can start with Minnesota, man. What are you doing with Towns? Are you assuming he's out? Do you think he's got a better chance to play than usual, or what?
I think he has a better chance to play than usual, and that's not based on a whole lot outside of the fact he has at least been practicing to some extent. And it just kind of seems like the Minnesota beat writers are not writing off him coming back tonight, whereas in the past it kind of just seemed like, he's questionable, but probably
and not ruling him out like 3 hours before lock. They're saying warm up, so maybe that means something.
Right, and fortunately, I don't think it has a huge impact. Like obviously, if Towns plays, it lowers usage for guys like Wiggins and Teague for whatever minutes they're on the floor with Towns. But I would expect him to be limited after missing so many games. And the only real minutes that it would affect that are viable, not including guys like Noah Vonleh, is Gorgie Deng, who, is expensive enough where it's not like he's a must play if Towns is out anymore. So that's kind of the nice thing. The way I approached it, and I talked to Josh, I think the way he was approaching it was I projected both guys, Gorgie Deng and Towns, for 24 minutes. That's probably not going to get me much of either one, but I don't think it has a huge impact outside of Deng.
Dude, even if I'm giving Towns 30 minutes, he's 11,100 on DraftKings,
Right. Like the only real thing outside of potentially affecting usage is if I were to give Gorgie Deng 30 minutes, he would look like a pretty good option. But it's not like he hasn't had games recently where he's only played 23 or 24 minutes anyway. So it's not like he's, some lock that you would have to have if Towns sits.
Okay. Andrew Wiggins, let me tell you this much, dude. What a colossal disappointment he was last game. Towns out, going up against a Memphis team that is playing at a huge, an elevated pace this season. Defensively, they've been terrible. I mentioned that I thought that game would go under. Memphis is the worst fourth quarter team in the league. Well, they had their best fourth quarter on the season by a mile. And I think there were like 6 for 7 combined, both teams shooting 3-pointers down in the last few minutes of the game. Just went completely against me. You move on. We still don't know what's going on here today, but Wiggins is basically the same price everywhere. If Towns is out, do you get to any Wiggins or the rest of this Timberwolves team?
I think Wiggins looks the best to me. He's actually been more productive with Towns on the floor this year, just shooting better, 1.14 DraftKings points per minute with Towns on compared to 1.03 without him. and the minutes should be there. You should get 34, 35 minutes, decent spot against Portland. So Wiggins looks pretty good to me. Covington as a secondary option, just a pretty inexpensive forward. And then on DraftKings, you have Jeff Teague and Shabazz Napier, both at $5,200. We're still not really seeing them play a lot of minutes alongside each other, and their playing time is, at least to some extent, dependent on how they're playing. In the most recent game, we saw 28 minutes from Teague, 24 from Napier. We've seen games recently where Napier gets 30 and Teague gets close to 18. I have them both projected at 26. It makes both of them project reasonably well, like 26, 27 points. So not priorities, but guys that are cheap enough on a slate with no value where I'll take some shots at them, just don't want them in the same lineup.
Okay. I want to go back to Super Chat. John Good, thanks for that, brother. He asked, if the Sixers go smaller and Korkmaz starts over Mike Scott, would you lower your exposure on Scott, or do you think he still gets the same run? No, I'd absolutely lower my exposure on Mike Scott. For me, whoever isn't in the starting lineup, I would be projecting them for less minutes than if they are. It's that simple. I'll let you answer.
The extension to that is that even though I think Scott's going to start, I only have him at 22 minutes.